All right. Sorry about the abrupt conclusion, or lack of conclusion, on last lecture. The camera overheated. It's hot out here. Anyway, I'm going to pick up here on where I left off in terms of the nitrogen cycle, in how people avoid decomposing material. When an organism dies and is broken down by all sorts of different species of bacterium and other decomposers, such as fungi, molds, and mushrooms, and scavengers, we can smell what we consider offensive. Now, a vulture smells a dead raccoon on the side of the road, and it's like delicious to the vulture, because that's what vultures eat. When we smell a dead raccoon on the road or a dead mouse in our attic, it's putrid, because it would actually make us sick if we came into contact with it, if we were to eat it or get any of the material of it in our system. So organisms have evolved to recognize what's good for them and what's not good for them. So part of the nitrogen cycle that I left off on included pee and poop and decomposing material, all of which are not preferred to be taken directly into our systems, but are the meal of choice for decomposers, scavengers, and the like. So everybody plays a role in their in the nitrogen cycle. All right, and one of those components, the major nitrogenous component of elimination, urine especially, is ammonia. It's got that cat pee smell, that window cleaner smell. Ammonia is volatile. It evaporates very easily, very readily, and at very low temperatures. So the ammonia is one of the last steps of the nitrogen cycle, where that molecule quickly vaporizes and almost as equally as easily breaks back up into hydrogen and nitrogen gas. That nitrogen gas is the end point of the nitrogen cycle, which not coincidentally is the beginning point of the nitrogen cycle, N2. It starts, cycles through all of the different organisms and fixes, becomes a nitrite, nitride, nitrate, ammonium, amide, amino acids that build proteins, eventually ends up as ammonia again, breaks back up into nitrogen gas. The cycle is continuous. Okay? So I do want you to be familiar with the nitrogen cycle. It ends where it begins, and it begins where it ends. And it's continuous. All right. We can advance to the last slide of this set. This is your atmosphere slide set 2. The last slide is entitled The Air We Breathe. And this is a very important introduction to the next cycle that will be an entirely new lecture after this one. The carbon cycle. Okay, so the air we breathe. Breathing is respiration. We respire. If your respiration rate is up, that typically means you're excited or you're doing some activity that requires a lot of energy. If you run up and down the stairs, or I roll up a ramp or up a hill, playing a sport, or doing any kind of strenuous activity, running from an axe murderer, chasing down an axe murderer. I don't know what you do, but whatever you do, and it requires energy that humans require is aerobic. It is oxygen related. The more we do, the more we need to breathe. If you ever see or, have been unfortunate enough to be injured or sick, when you're taken into the hospital, the first thing they do is put on an oxygen mask. Why? You're not suffocating. But as your body is excited or in need of replenishing the greater amount of oxygen that you can be exposed to, essentially the better off you will do. If you have ever just been sitting around, like now, you're probably not doing something terribly active because you're participating in class. You could hold your breath. I'm not going to do it, but you can hold your breath for probably a period of 15 seconds with ease, and some of you can maybe go twice that or even 3 times that before you have to absolutely breathe back in. Your body's tissues are using the oxygen that you breathed in on that last breath, and your metabolic reactions are taking oxygen from the larger molecules of gas that you breathed in. And eventually, all of that oxygen that you could have absorbed on that one inhale is used up. You have to exhale and breathe back in again. Now, I'll try to keep out of the details as much as possible, but it's kind of neat. The human body, the way our respiratory system is set up, we only absorb the oxygen as we take the air in. You have absorbed all the oxygen you are possibly going to absorb out of that breath. No matter how long you hold that breath for thereafter, negligible amount of oxygen is going to be continued to transfer across your membrane. So holding your breath in does not extend the amount of time you have before you have to exhale and take a new breath in. Each breath is only usable during that actual breath itself, not during the time that you're holding it. So, if you notice, if you do some activity, go ahead and, run, take a few brisk steps, 50 feet, and come back, and then hold your breath. See if you can hold your breath for as long as you could while you were just sitting watching this incredibly exciting lecture. I'll bet you will not be able to hold your breath as long after activity than you can before, because you require more oxygen. All right, so oxygen acquisition by mammals is referred to as respiration. We breathe in and we breathe out. We absorb oxygen in those inhales and we exhale, basically essentially the same gas as we breathed in, with more carbon dioxide in it. Our waste product, our cellular waste, is carbon dioxide. Plants' input product is carbon dioxide and their waste is oxygen. So we actually create a carbon dioxide molecule with each oxygen molecule that we break apart. We link a carbon from our system onto an unused oxygen to create carbon dioxide. And plants do the exact opposite. So we're going to look at the carbon cycle in the next lecture, but I want to introduce to you some of the super important functions that carbon and oxygen play both in our system and in our atmosphere system. We know from previous lectures that oxygen makes up merely 21% of the atmosphere, and carbon dioxide makes up less than 1%. Tiny, tiny, tiny bit. But that little tiny, tiny bit is crucial to the survival of plants, which in turn is crucial to the survival of literally everything else. All right? So what plants do with carbon dioxide is link gaseous carbon dioxide to a split water molecule, H2O, and make glucose, sugar, C6H12O6. That's a much bigger molecule than H2O or CO2. It's C6H12O6. 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, 6 oxygens. So it's a much bigger molecule, glucose. Plants are sugary, and not all sugar is sweet. You know, if you eat a carrot, it's loaded with sugar. It's loaded with glucose, but it wouldn't be considered like a sweet dessert, right? Eat lettuce or kale or collards. Those are loaded with sugars, but they're not simple sugars. They're not the sweet sucrose or fructose sugar. They are starches. A bunch of big sugar molecules linked together to make an even longer chain called a polymer, or a polysaccharide, a complex carbohydrate. Nobody would consider noodles sweet, like pasta. It's loaded with sugar. We eat pasta to get a lot of energy to go do some high-intensity activities. That's sugars, but it's complex sugars. And it all deals with carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. So with all of this metabolic discussion afoot, I want you to be aware that the carbon cycle is very, very much a biotic interaction. The carbon cycle happens in the presence of living organisms, both plant and animal, and the plant and animal balance also governs the rate and efficiency and efficacy of the cycle itself. So we'll be looking at cyanobacteria, algae, plants, plant-like protists, and the animal life that lives off of those, lives off of the energy, the glucose, the starches that the plants make literally out of thin air. Kind of like magic. Pretty neat, right? And then we'll look at the abiotic aspect of the carbon cycle, the dreaded greenhouse effect, global warming, climate change, all of these terrible, terrible things, but get an understanding of what they are, how they are influenced, their rate, what our future prospects are given current behaviors, use of fossil fuels and burning things, the deforestation, the reforestation. How about that one? Reforestation. That's a good thing. We'll look at that aspect, the weather and climate aspect of the carbon cycle. All right? So, albeit we're on atmosphere, it seems like we're talking a whole lot about biology and chemistry. And we are, because earth science incorporates all of the sciences. And this first group of lectures on the atmosphere is the chemical components. And then the second half of this unit will be focused on the environmental impacts and the weather and the climate patterns and wind and rain and snow and sleet and hail and fog and humidity and clouds and sun, high pressure and low pressure, all of that stuff. It's a huge unit, but it's good stuff. Things you are better off being familiar with than not being familiar with, because it's all around you all the time. All right? Another lecture coming up later. Talk soon. Hope you learned something.